So recently I made some videos on capitalism and how I think that the anti-capitalist, generally pro-communist, pro-socialist sentiment nowadays that's definitely risen in popularity. Like I'll see a lot of ads for the Communist Club and stuff around university campus and whatever. Amongst my generation, it's definitely surged in popularity, and personally, I'm generally pro-capitalism, but obviously, it has problems. But I think people just saying, "Oh, we should just get rid of the system," or their tendency to just blame everything on the system, I think it's just intellectually lazy and irresponsible. But in an effort to be as balanced as possible and to stress my own perspective and bias, I thought we could have a debate on not capitalism versus communism, but sort of the roots of capitalism and whether or not it's fundamentally structured on exploitation. So, my position for this sort of debate will be that the very structure of capitalism creates a systematic extraction of wealth and value from workers.
Okay. Um, well, I mean, for me, the merits of capitalism uh, probably arise from. I guess I'd frame the argument in three separate ways. One of which you've you just said you maybe want to sort of avoid going in this direction, but I would say capitalism as opposed to what, right? So there's that. Um,
Yeah.
don't judge capitalism on its own, but judge it in
Against other systems.
in comparison to other systems. And and I think that there is some merit to some aspects of socialism, for example. I mean, here in Canada, we do have a generally capitalist system with also mixed with some socialism, where the government has deemed there to be effectively a market failure. So yeah, that
Yeah.
seems like a reasonable approach.
There's a lot
But
of muddying in the waters when it comes to like people talking about socialism and communism. They sort of conflate them a lot. Um,
right,
and socialism inherently is like there's a lot of socialist structures and systems that pretty much everyone is for, whether it's like the
fire department.
fire department, police, um, some form of healthcare, that's like preventative for like emergency care.
Hmm.
Like these are very popular positions and policies to have in place. Like the most extreme libertarians or anarchists would say, "Oh yeah, we there's no tax funded subsidized anything."
Right. So yeah. So first of all, I'd say is yeah, capitalism may or may not be good, but in relation to what? So there's that side of things. The other is I would say just look at the empirical evidence of countries around the world that have employed capitalism versus countries around the world that have employed communism. And the communist experiment has almost universally, in fact, I would say universally failed. The best example of that right now is, of course, North Korea. Um, the best example of that prior to its collapse in the early 90s was the Soviet Union, and
Venezuela, Cuba, etc., etc.
Venezuela and Cuba are their current examples, none of which have, um, uh, well, I guess I would say not only have they failed economically, but they've also failed their own people. If you look at the average income and the average quality of life of people in any of those countries, it's dramatically less than than what you would see in more capitalist societies like, say, Singapore and the United States, or even more mixed societies like Canada and Western Europe.
Yeah,
Um,
and I agree that communism is basically a failed idea, and the common argument from communists is, oh well, that's just not true. That's not true communism. Real communism just hasn't been done right, and those are they're corrupted by whatever.
Right.
That's why I don't really want this debate to be about like capitalism versus communism. I think I want it to be more about the fact that we know capitalism is flawed, and I think the anti-capitalist sentiment is that
I mean, say we know communism is flawed.
no, we know capitalism has its problems, right? There's great wealth inequality. There is, there's issues with it. It's not a perfect system. And I think the anti-capitalist sentiment would be to say that those problems are inherent to the very structure of capitalism, whereas the pro-capitalist sentiment would just be to say that those are byproducts of bad actors or, lack of policy, lack of regulation, or whatever.
Fair enough. Or maybe they're inherently part of the system because people need incentives to actually work harder and work smarter, and the fact that they might have less under a capitalist system, that might very well be, a feature, not a bug, because people need incentives to like I say, to work harder and work smarter, to try and achieve more, to go to school, to do, um, to try and innovate. So I mean, the inherent inequality in capitalism may very well be a feature, not a bug. I'm willing to sort of posit that that's very very possibly the case, and therefore you may end up finding that yeah, you do have higher levels of inequality as a result. It's quite possible. So if we're not going to talk about capitalism versus communism, or then I guess I would sort of start off my main defense of capitalism comes down to, I think that freedom as a freedom as in and of itself is a has merit, and has is a goal that is worth striving for in and of itself. And capitalism, as an economic system, um, is effectively freedom. Freedom to choose what to buy, freedom to choose where to work, or if to work, or how to work. It's economic freedom in terms of the goods and services that we produce, and freedom to choose the goods and services that we consume. And again, I don't want to make comparisons to communism, but yeah, ultimately, the freedom to make our own choices is inherent within the capitalist system. And so I think freedom is a goal unto itself that is has value and merit all by itself.
So you would value the freedom and therefore the resulting inequality over a more fair outcome based economic system that limited freedom, essentially.
Well, how do we define fairness, though? Too, I mean, do you define fairness on equality of outcomes, or equality of opportunities? If we all have equal opportunities, or some level of equal opportunities, then fairness, well, then the outcomes will generally flow from our own choices that we've made. And so if we choose to spend all of our free money on cigarettes and alcohol and gambling, well, then we ought not be too surprised that that um, well, a that's your choice, but b, you might find out that at the end of 20, 30 years of doing that, you may not like the results. But again, we had the freedom to make that choice. So whereas
Mm-hmm.
yeah, um, so I would say yeah, I'd be worried about conflating the equality of outcomes with the equality of with some sense of fairness about opportunities. So
Yeah, the two definitely get mixed, and I think that's a big part of the divide on the debate for sure. Is most people pro capitalism are talking about equality as equality of opportunity, and most people anti-capitalism are talking about equality as equality of outcome,
Hmm.
because equality of opportunity doesn't create equal outcome generally,
Yeah.
especially when you have equality of opportunity plus the freedom to make choices.
Well, I think, I mean, that's why I think largely most people wouldn't argue for a completely uh, anarchistic,
Free society.
free society where there are very minimal rules, completely libertarian, where, if you're born to rich parents, well, then you just inherently have a dramatically bigger step ahead than poorer kids. So I think a lot of people in in a free society would also see some merit in having a bit of a progressive tax system that would then redistribute some, not so much outcome, but redistribute um, from the those that have succeeded to provide a base level of opportunity to everybody as well, so that they all can. So that's why you'll notice it. Well, you maybe don't notice, but that's why some schools, for example, in poorer neighborhoods, they tend to have more resources so that those kids aren't left behind, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they may very well be left behind from their own, from other circumstances, but we should. A lot of people would think that we should try to prop up the folks with a basic level. So that's why there are programs in place, for example, income supplements for people that are extremely lower income, especially people that are disabled. If there's somebody has a disability, then most people would say, well, that's not fair that they shouldn't be living on the street if they, just because they've got a disability.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, it's a difficult thing to find that right balance. But no, I think in general that we ought to be free to bear the outcome of our own choices, and we should be free to make those choices for the most part, unless those choices have an impact on other people. So the classic definition is I'm free to flail my fists around in the air, but that freedom ends 2 inches in front of your nose. Um, I tend to apply that to all sorts of other things when it comes to free choices. So if I choose to work 60 hours a week and somebody else chooses to work 20 hours a week, well, we also are free to enjoy the difference in the outcomes there as well. So
Yeah. So one of the probably the core, I don't know if it was like an assumption or just sort of a proposition within the anti-capitalist sentiment, is the theory of the labor theory of value, where a value is determined by the
the
amount
market,
of labor time
the
and
market.
productivity put into produce whatever commodity that thing is. And in a market exchange, workers receive the wages that reflect a portion of the value of the work, and then the remainder goes to the capitalist as a profit. And then that exchange isn't voluntary, and it's inherently an appropriation because the workers lack ownership of the means of production.
Just saying it's involuntary. It's portrayed to be voluntary, but really it's involuntary.
Yeah, like
Mm-hmm.
the excess amount of value that is given to the capitalist or the business owner or whatever is essentially viewed as a, not theft, but like uh, an unequal distribution of the value of the commodity.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I would say that if that worker feels like he or she is not properly valued for their time, then they don't have to do that work. They can go find other work. Um, Labor is a commodity just like any other commodity that is traded. I agree to work for you for 4 hours. restocking the restocking the produce shelves at Thrifty Foods. You agree to pay me a certain number of hours, and I agree that this is worth my time to do that. So therefore, we both, store owner and employee, both freely agree to make this exchange. If you think that's not, if the employee thinks that's not worth their time and that they should be paid more, well, then they are um, free to go find work elsewhere. And if enough people decide to have the same opinion, then the store owner will be, just as in with any market, if they will need to raise their prices, raise their wages, to attract people to come and do that work. So um, I would say that like I said, just because um, I don't uh, I don't see how it's necessarily exploitative, if the worker is not getting all, a larger portion of the so-called profits of the of the of the business, basically. Um, for one thing, the owner of the business, so in this case, the grocery store, had to buy all of those goods to sell, had to buy the building where they're sold, had to provide all of the systems and, create the business, and a huge amount of capital had to go into doing that. And on top of that, had to take the risk of um, of employing all that capital, and in hopes that they can sell carrots for more than what they paid for them. And so, yeah, maybe the employer or employee might feel like they're entitled to more, but that's ignoring a huge part of the equation, which is the large amount of capital that's outlaid, and also the wages that, and the risk that went into taking on this enterprise. So
Hmm. I do agree that the workers have the freedom to find employment elsewhere, but a rebuttal to that would be that there's a power asymmetry between the employer and the employee, because the capitalists control capital assets like factories or patents or financial instruments, and that gives them bargaining power over the workers, which makes the relationship coercive rather than mutually beneficial in a lot of cases where unemployment or skill mismatches exist, or especially when there's in a lot of labor markets, there are a few large employers that dominate a lot of hiring because they own a majority of the companies, and that gives them the ability to set the wages low. And even with a formal appearance of competition, the lack of alternative buyers for laborers creates an imbalance in wage competition.
yeah, I mean, there's two things at play there as well. That, like, again, getting back to the I don't think anybody here is arguing for a purely um, libertarian system where there are no rules, or very few rules. I mean, if competition does not exist, then that has problems unto itself. And so, we also need, for capitalism to work really well, you do need to have fully functioning markets. And if you have extremely inefficient markets, for example, with oligopolies, duopolies, or your worse, monopolies, then yes, you do end up with a system where there are other inefficiencies that are created. But that doesn't. But assuming that you have the proper safeguards in place to prevent anti-capitalist, anti-competitive behavior, then that should not, that should not result. The other thing that a a free society and therefore capitalist society, but a free society requires to fully function is a is a robust judiciary and rule of law and you know and so therefore legal recourse ought to be made available to help to right that power imbalance. Because yes, I agree that there is a power imbalance between the wealthy and the workers, and so that's where you need to have sets of laws in place that protect workers and that protect the system in general, so that we don't just end up with uh, the strong being able to dominate the weak, so to speak. Um, so yeah, no, I think any capital system also needs to have a robust set of safeguards in place, which is provided by rule of law and the judiciary, and also to assist to make sure the competition stays in place. So otherwise, yeah, I mean, I think that what you're getting at before is the case, which is that some of the uh, some of the arguments against capitalism are actually arguments that are not so much against capitalism itself, but against the weak being in a permanently subjugated position against the powerful, and um, that's not how I see capitalism. So,
Okay. Another big point against capitalism is the wage productivity gap, and how a lot of studies show that wages grow far slower than productivity goes over time, meaning that the workers generate surplus value that they don't end up receiving. And this persistent gap sort of signals that there's some sort of systemic extraction going on from the workers.
well, I wasn't aware that that was the case. However, if workers, I mean, one possible remedy for that is if workers feel like um, they are not being properly compensated, is they can always choose to form a union to collectively bargain for their rights, whether it's their wages or their working conditions. So that's that's always a one possible remedy that workers potentially could have at their disposal. Um, Fortunately or unfortunately, AI is going to take all of our jobs away anyways, and so this will become more and more of a moot point, I suppose. So, or so the theory goes. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I wasn't aware that more and more of the of the benefits of productivity growth are just accruing to the owners of capital. Of course, we also live in a very competitive system, so the owners of that capital are constantly having to redeploy profits back into the business to continue to make those workers, well, not just those workers, but the business more efficient and more productive. And so it's not like the business owners are necessarily getting richer and richer and richer at the expense of workers that are being left behind. It's that the profits from the company have to get redeployed back into new equipment, new systems, new technology, um, perhaps even more workers, new products, all these kind of R&D, all this kind of stuff that will then turn around and make everybody more successful as well. Um, so yeah,
Yeah.
I don't necessarily see that at least not in Canada, anyways, where the workers are being left behind while the owners of the company are just getting richer and richer and richer. Um, that is definitely a problem in some places, like in the States, especially where you've got the wage gap between the average worker and the average CEO is gone from being say 10 times, 20 times to being like hundreds of times larger. Um, but again, that's something that ought to be um, well, on the one hand, that if a CEO is able to masterfully run a company, then maybe they are worth that. If you look at the if you look at the rather masterful work that say Steve Jobs and then Tim Cook did to take Apple from being a near bankrupt computer company to being one of the three largest corporations on the planet with the some of the highest margins and highest profitability, and how many hundreds of thousands of millionaires that they've created by people who work there, as well as people that invest there, but people who work there. Um, you know, it, maybe Tim Cook and maybe Steve Jobs before him were worth what they were paid. So,
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to. I'm trying my best to steelman this position, but a part of it could also be that productivity's gone up so much because of technological advancement, right? Like the average
that's
worker
that's largely it. Yeah.
can do so much more with, computer, a cell phone, whatever. Um, but again, I'm trying my best to steelman
Mm-hmm.
the anti-capitalist position here. So I would say another aspect of it is the global dimension and sort of the outsourcing of labor to other firms or other countries where companies can outsource production to low wage regions and sort of take advantage of cheaper labor and further exploitation across borders, basically.
Mm-hmm. I guess I would use the Dave Chappelle argument, which is what he said last year in response to Donald Trump and his tariffs. And he's like, "Look, I want to wear Nikes. I don't want to have to make them." Now, that's a glib way of saying that there are a multitude of jobs. I mean, the multitude of jobs in a multitude of industries, and the United States, for example, has become, just to pick on them, has gone from being, has had several revolutions, as has the rest of the world, but the United States is the best studied in the sense that, prior to 1800, literally 95% of the population, their job was farmer. Everybody had to basically grow their own food for the most part. Other people would take on other jobs too, as you'd have people that could be lawyers and shopkeepers and whatnot, perhaps on the side. But everybody was in the business of growing their own food prior to the agricultural revolution and prior to that the industrial revolution. Um, and then the United States became a manufacturing powerhouse, as did most of Europe, and as did Japan, as did parts of Canada. It was manufacturing then became the basis of our economy, or sort of their economy, but of the global economy. Now the United States, yes, they've lost millions of jobs in manufacturing, but those jobs have largely been replaced by the services industry. So now the United States is, yes, they do consume lots of goods, but most of those goods are not manufactured in the U.S. But the United States is a services juggernaut, and whether that's technology, whether that's entertainment, whether that's financial services, whether that's education services. I mean, think of all of the millions of kids that come from all around the world to study at American universities. So the United States exports. Yes, they are a net importer of goods, and so therefore they're a net importer of, and so therefore they would have lost a lot of jobs to, say, for example, China. But a lot of those jobs actually weren't outsourced to China. A lot of those were outsourced to technology. technology has made it so that a steel manufacturing plant that would have had to employ 10,000 people before can do the same amount of work with 1,000 people. It's not so much that the all the steel coming into the U.S. is coming from China, although some of it was, but it's just the technology has made a lot of goods manufacturing significantly um, more efficient. And that's definitely the case with things like cars and appliances and all the other goods manufacturing that happens. Um, so and if you look at the U.S., they're sitting at a 4.5% unemployment rate, so which is like very much near the theoretical minimum. So it's not like there are a whole series of jobs that have all been lost. I mean, in a sense of permanent loss, because the economy is always reinventing itself with new industries and therefore new modes of employment. But it's that the what people are doing has changed dramatically as well. So um, yes, capitalism is going to try to find the lowest way, the cheapest way to build things, whether that's through more technology or whether that's through um, clustering suppliers all in the same area, which is why, for example, until Trump decided to meddle with things, why you had a very successful car industry that was stretched from Ohio to Michigan to Ontario, and they were very integrated because you had thousands of parts suppliers all very near the major manufacturing plants for the various car manufacturers. So that's one way to sort of counteract outsourcing of jobs to overseas. Is you have a competitive advantage, or maybe it's the fact that there's a reason why aluminum manufacturing is heavily concentrated in Quebec, because Quebec has among the largest amount of hydropower in North America. So aluminum is a very energy intensive metal. So Quebec's advantage is that they can produce aluminum at a far more competitive price than other jurisdictions. Um, so it's not necessarily that aluminum is going to be coming from China, because Quebec can do it just as well and be much closer to the end market as well. So yes, jobs do get lost to in manufacturing, and some jobs are jobs that our industries and jobs are things that we've actually chosen to not want to have here. I'm thinking about smelters. I'm thinking about um, uh, rare earths processing, which is quite a dirty business. And so we've been fairly happy to outsource that to places like China, because we don't want to have the environmental sort of effects of those industries here in North America to the same extent. And so China was happy to take those, and of course that's led to other sort of bottleneck problems, where China realizes that they can exert influence over our policies by cutting off supplies of things like high grade magnets, for example, that have to go into electric cars, um, or into so anyways, it has second and third and fourth order effects that maybe not were not intended. But my point is, we collectively, like as a system, chose to allow certain industries to no longer sort of operate here on a substantial basis. And that's not to say that that we've necessarily fallen behind, in the sense that all of our workers are out of work, and that capitalism is just moving on to the next lowest common denominator in China and India and Vietnam. It's that we've chosen to replace those jobs with far higher value jobs. So yeah, Apple iPhones are made in China for the most part, with components from all over the place, but mostly they're made in China. However, most of the engineering is done Cupertino, California, and there is far higher value that's extracted um, on the design side of things than there is in actually screwing the little metal case on there on in place. So it's complex, but I mean that is one of the inherent features of capitalism is that industries perpetually get um, left in the dustbin of history and new industries get created. So around 1900, there probably were a heck of a lot more farriers, which is the people that make and install horseshoes, and there were a heck of a lot of saddle makers, and there were a heck of a lot more um, farmers growing oats and hay for horses than there are today, because we used to need horses and buggies to get around and operate on the farm, and now for the most part we don't. So yes, there an entire set of professions uh, were decimated by 99% as a result of the invention of the automobile. But um, people are very adaptable, and they went to work in you know, car factories and gas stations and garages and blah blah blah. And the same's happening right now with electric cars, and so we're going to need less hydrocarbons eventually in the future. Same thing's happening, of course, with AI, and we're yes, millions of jobs are going to be impacted by AI, but um, in theory, millions more jobs could be created in industries that kind of come out of AI as well, or come out of um, yeah. So this has happened several times, and I suspect it's going to keep on happening for well into the future.
Yeah, fair enough. So I think my final core argument for the anti-capitalist case would
Oh,
be that the mechanism of profit maximization inherently creates wealth concentration and therefore inequality amongst the workers and the employers, but also the profit maximization, the profit seeking creates exploitative incentives, like in terms of automation or robotics, for example. Like it's much cheaper for an employer to have a bunch of robot workers that can just work 24/7, don't need healthcare, don't need whatever, don't need nearly as many benefits. You don't even need to pay them. You just need to you know fuel them with electricity or whatever and get maintenance on them every once in a while. And that sort of profit maximization can lead to uh, you know bad outcomes for workers in terms of well-being and um, wages and all sorts of stuff.
that's a good question.
Basically, the profit incentivized nature of capitalism leads to unequal outcomes and unequal um, circumstances.
Yeah, I would argue there's probably a fair amount of truth in that, and that's where you need to have a robust system in place to. Um, but that's not really an argument against capitalism. That's an argument against not having a fair tax system that takes some of those uh, profits of capitalism and taxes them to provide benefits for all. The capitalism has resulted because profit motive is always sort of like the the nasty way of describing capitalism, but that profit motive is what leads to innovation. It's what leads to um, all of us getting to enjoy better quality goods and services and a higher standard of living. But yes, if the benefits of that only get accrued to the owners of the capital, i.e., the business owners, um, and none of it goes to regular folk, by which the government is effectively allowing all of the concentration of wealth to accumulate in a few hands, then yeah, of course that's going to lead to uh, the villagers coming out with pitchforks, trying to trying to uh, trying to raid the mansions, basically, right? So, and understandably so. So, what you do need is, like I said earlier, you need a robust set of rule of law. You need a robust set of judiciary, and you need um, a, a tax system that will tax some of the folks that have done exceptionally well and provide opportunities the um, for folks that otherwise have been left behind. So yeah, no one's arguing for a completely libertarian set of capitalism, but I think it's more of a case of uh, the exploitation of workers, the exploitation of, say, externalities like the environment, for example, carbon emissions. That's not really a flaw of capitalism. That's just a flaw of not taxing things and having a little more redistribution of the wealth. I think that the two probably ought to be mixed hand in hand to provide um, the common services that we all tend to need. So, did I answer
Okay.
that properly, or
Yeah, I think so.
more or less?
So I think your core argument for capitalism would basically be that it is a self-stabilizing system based on the freedom that capitalism provides and the incentive structures that maximize for innovation and the betterment of society through competition driven opportunities and freedom of choice.
Yeah, I mean, I started off with my core was about freedom and freedom of choice, and therefore freedom of outcome, not necessarily freedom of not really necessarily a quality of outcome, but freedom to chart your own path, freedom to buy the goods and services that you want to, free to produce the goods and services that you want. That's definitely a core part of it. The stability argument is actually is interesting because it's an inherently stable, but also at the same time unstable. I mean, like I said, all of the time businesses are going out of business. Workers are getting laid off. Workers get fired. They're like the system is like I'd almost say it's um, like a whirlpool. It it is constantly churning through. Old things are getting sucked down the bottom, so to speak.
Like businesses and industries are
Business
coming and
industries,
going,
but
and
new businesses get created at the top as well. And I mean, look at Facebook, which was only created about 15 years ago. Google was only created 20 odd years ago, and these are massive. Google is now, I think, is now the third largest business in the entire world, third or fourth. It's definitely the top five. And this is only became public 20 odd years ago. Um, and this was brought about by the internet, which was itself only created about 40 years ago, roughly speaking.
mm-hmm.
So capitalism has been shown to be the best way for us to provide humans with incentives to innovate, which provides all of us with better quality goods and services, and also provides a, a better the best way to raise the average standard of living for people within the system, and problems of inequality can be addressed by um, having a robust set of rules and laws to protect uh, sort of the weaker participants within the system, but also also a fairer tax system that can help to spread some of the benefits of capitalism to everybody in society as well. So um, I think it's been shown that, sorry, getting back to the alternative, like because communism is the answer, um, where by definition workers are paid the same, business owners are paid the same. Well, there's no business owners, but the managers of business are paid the same whether they excel or whether they put in a half-assed effort. That clearly has been shown to not provide incentives to for people to try to exceed in their work or in their inventions or in like I say in innovation, and therefore yes, everyone's always more equally and fairly distributed in terms of wealth, but the overall level of wealth is lower, and so therefore um, uh, it's just an inherently uh, poorer system, basically.
Yeah, well, I do agree. I enjoyed this exercise in trying to steelman my own,
Still meant against
still
your
against my own position, basically. Yeah, it was difficult to try and defend the positions against capitalism because every time, I put an idea forward or put an argument forward, I can already like see the flaw in the reasoning behind it, but I have to sort of just pretend like it's true anyways, while or
uh,
pretend like it's logically sound.
so you're
But
saying you gave me the easier task.
yeah, basically, I mean, I was trying
That's
my
good.
best to steelman the anti-capitalist take, and I probably need to do more reading on it and all that. But I mean, yes, the reason I wanted to center the debate around whether or not capitalism was fundamentally exploitative is I think that's more interesting than capitalism versus communism, because I think despite what the communists will say, it's quite cut and dry as to which system produces better outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Even though there's arguments saying, oh well, capitalism has produced lots of inequality and death and whatever, but like open a history book and look at any failed communist society and see mass starvation or mass whatever,
Um, yeah, I mean, in terms of systems that have produced more
loss of
more
life.
loss of life, I think you could say Chairman Mao and
Stalin.
Stalin are
Yeah.
probably lead the pack there. So yeah, I didn't even get into that, but
Yeah. Anyways, thanks for sitting down with me today.
thank you.